Hello and welcome to your HR Career Podcast. I'm very pleased today to be starting a new series, which is Friends of HR, I'm calling them. And my today's guest, Paul Duffield from Eyes On, is definitely a friend of HR. We've known each other a very long time. In fact, he's got me some of my best jobs. So he knows all there is to know about HR. So welcome to the podcast, Paul.
Thank you for having me, Jane.
And thank you to have your time. I think it's always interesting, to look into other people's careers. I was particularly interested to hear about yours because I've known you professionally for a long time, but I never really knew your dim and distant past. So I was intrigued, and I'm sure lots of other listeners will be interested to hear about it as well. So let's get started. So as with the other shows that I've done, you regular listeners will know that I send everybody questions beforehand, and then I pick out their juiciest answers to go through. So where I want to start with you, Paul, is to talk about how did you get into what you're doing? So tell us a little bit about what you do first, and then tell us how you got into it, please.
Okay, so for the last 20 years or so, in sort of two guises, I've been doing HR recruitment. So, that's how I've come across you, Jane, and lots of others. And that has been for a larger national business and then my own business for the last 15 or so years of that. But prior to that, so I got into recruitment I've said this before, Shane, for the love of a good woman is the honest answer. So I got into recruitment because my now wife was based up in Yorkshire. I was down in London. I wanted to come back up north. I was at that time working for People Management magazine. So the days where there was 50 to 100 pages of recruitment adverts every fortnight, and an advert came through for recruitment consultants to move to Leeds. And because I had that in the days of magazines, I had that advert a week ahead of it actually being out in print. I mean, who knows these days that you can wait a week for an advert to come out? I had it in advance. I knew who the client was. I rang him up. I got an interview during the CIPD conference in Harrogate in the Hotel Divan. Nice. I landed the job. I took a 50% pay cut, and I moved from the world of media sales up into the world of recruitment consultancy, which was, I'd never done it before. They took a punt on me. And
how old were you at that point?
How old was I? I was probably early 30s at that point. So okay. I had done a stint in media sales in London for a contract publishing company.
Yeah.
I'd worked there all the way through 8 to 9 years, probably straight out of university.
Yeah.
Maybe 10 years or so straight out of university. And all that I'd done in between was I'd fallen for the line of a slick salesman who had said to me, come and join another company. I went to join them for 5 weeks, realized I'd made an almighty error, and then jumped back to the publishers of People Management very quickly. I think I said this on my note. The finance director knew that I wouldn't last at this new business and knew it was a whole sham. He even let me keep my company car for 5 weeks, even not being employed by this company.
That was kind.
Yeah, but I went back. I went back to them and then did a few more years and then into the world of recruitment.
And what was it about recruitment? So what's the line, what's the join the dots for me between media sales and recruitment? What did you think was a similarity? Because they obviously thought there was something.
Yes, well, I think there was two bits to it. First of all, at its heart, both of them were sales jobs.
Yeah.
But I hope they were consultative sales jobs rather than full-on nasty, aggressive sales jobs. And I was selling to HR consultancies and to HR directors at People Management. So there was an understanding of HR.
Yeah.
The business I joined up in Leeds was Fraser Jones, and I'd met Mark Brewer, who was the partner at Fraser Jones in those days. Had been a client, so we'd worked together, we'd negotiated, we'd argued over prices of adverts and all sorts of stuff for about 5 or 6 years. So we knew each other fairly well, as well in all of this.
And so you're landing in Leeds then?
Yeah.
What year are we in?
We're in 2005. I land in Leeds, and despite being Yorkshire born and bred, I'd never been to Leeds, I don't think, maybe once or twice.
Had you been allowed out? You'd been to Harrogate or
I,
York, presumably?
I've been to Harrogate or York, but I'd not gone to West Yorkshire, Jane. I mean,
Mm.
that was a step too far.
It's a different
Um,
council, yeah.
Different council, absolutely. And so I didn't know where to go. I didn't understand the loop road. I was clearly far too posh because I went to Pret on my first day, and I remember somebody saying in the office, "He must be posh. He's got cress in his sandwich." Which I thought, what have I done? What have I joined? Because I'd had 10 years down in London, which was
Yeah.
fantastic. So suddenly I was back in Yorkshire.
And what was the HR realm then in Leeds in 2005? What kind of businesses were you working with? What kind of roles were you placing? Give us a feel of those early.
So this was probably mid-level HR generalist roles. I remember my first two ever placements actually were in the world of L&D. And there were two L&D managers at Mamas and Papas, no less.
Yeah.
I remember the two characters very well, Karen Oldroyd and, crikey, Phil Daniels. So placed those two people, but then we also did a lot of work for what was in those days Norwich Union.
Yeah.
And then this sort of slightly odd business that no one had ever really heard of called Jet2 landed. And I remember going down to Poole in Dorset to meet the then personnel director. And she told me that they were moving this airline up north and could we help them with some recruitment. And because I was the only recruitment consultant that went down to Poole to see her, we got the work. And that started a 10+ year relationship, placing a lot of the Jet2 HR team as they grew and they developed and they moved up from Bournemouth up to some porter cabins around the back of the airport.
Exactly. And that was at the point where Leeds Bradford was exploding as well, wasn't it?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Yeah. So it's always been an eclectic mix of clients from retail, financial services, airlines, but it's always been mid to senior level HR.
Yeah. And do you think that climate's different because you've got experience now having covering London as well? Do you think there is something particular about the Yorkshire market that has that really interesting combination of sizes and industries?
Yes. I mean, I think compared to London recruiters who can specialise in financial services or media or telcos or whatever it may be, we have to be more diverse in terms of the sectors and the understanding of the candidates and that sort of stuff. But equally, I've always said, and right from the very beginning, we as recruiters and our business has to be sector agnostic. And actually, some of our best placements have been placing people out of milk and cheese businesses into pensions businesses. And actually, more recently, placing somebody out of financial and professional services into the world of water and sewage.
And so because that's really interesting to me, because that's something that comes up quite a lot on these conversations, is this point where somebody is trying to make a move to a different sector and they're either told they can't or they're blocked by a recruiter or they can't apply. But you don't have that view on it, do you?
Well, I don't have that view on it, but it has taken me 10 to 15 years to get more confident at it, to get better at it happening, to pushing back with clients who say, no, we must have somebody, because for us, at the beginning of a process, we will generally get told this is what the ideal candidate looks like. Yeah. And by the end of the process, they may well have that exact identikit candidate that they came to us for, but they also might have something completely different. Yeah. And that example of someone going into the world of utilities recently, the brief we had from the CPO was really tight. Yeah. And what they ended up with is somebody absolutely fantastic, but not what they'd asked for. And that comes from experience, a bit of confidence, a bit of being a bit of a grumpy old goat, cantankerous old goat that I am, and pushing back and saying, it's not going to happen, trust me. I think it also comes down to, Jane, having the confidence to put a candidate forward to know that you're not going to look silly when the client then rings you up to say, well, what on earth did you put X, Y, and Z forward for? You know, and that confidence is from years of knowing who's right, who's good, who can adapt. And I'm not saying that every candidate can, but the vast majority of candidates can adapt from one sector to another. And I think where it gets nailed down that you can't work in law firms unless you've worked for law firms or whatever it may be, I quite enjoy challenging those norms and putting people forward for jobs who might not get them through other recruiters or through direct applications.
And have you ever been wrong?
Of course I have, absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. One of my strongest now relationships is of somebody who I said, you won't get on with X, so I'm not putting you forward for that job.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, they got that job through another recruiter, so I looked an absolute chump. But thankfully they have gone on to become a good client, candidate and friend.
Yes. And so what are you assessing then? So law firms obviously is my bread and butter, so I understand that. So typically, obviously conservative, they want more of the same, they don't want to take a risk. So what is it you're looking for in a candidate to be bold enough to say, look, I know they've not come from what you're looking for, but you need to give them a go because of this? What is it you're looking for?
I think it is personality, it is style, it is ability. I mean, the law firm example, it's somebody who's capable to push back at the right time, knowing which battles to fight, knowing when to just back off or calm down.
Yeah.
And that, that sometimes takes time to get to know somebody, to see, in our interactions as recruiters with people, how they interact with us, how they interact through various processes. A little bit is a bit of fingers crossed and taking a punt.
Yeah.
But I would rather protect the relationship with the client and not get that wrong than just push a load of non-qualified people forward and get a bad rap or relationship with that particular client. So actually, I don't think it's the skills bit, because I think the HR gang, they can tick the boxes around the HR ability. It is a style, it is a personality. And equally, Jane, there are some people who are just not right for that. They wouldn't enjoy the partnership environment. They wouldn't understand, they wouldn't enjoy the interaction with partners. Equally, there are some people who just would not enjoy the interaction in a manufacturing business.
Yeah.
And we do have to make a call at some point in our job. There are some candidates who will tell us absolutely they can do absolutely everything for everybody. And at some point we have to make a call to say, we don't think you can. And we might get that right and we might get that wrong. Hopefully we get it more right than wrong.
Yeah, so a bit more of the horses for courses. So I guess what I'm hearing, which I think is really interesting, and I've never really sort of given it enough thought, is you have to have a real innate understanding of what works in a particular business. So how does that HR role fit within that business? And how will it need to be performing day by day to be successful? So there's that kind of understanding of business DNA, isn't there?
Yes, and even within the law firm example, there are law firms in, let's say Leeds, that you would say somebody would be absolutely spot on for that, but they're not for that firm, but they might not be spot on for that firm. And that's where it comes down to personalities. Who is the managing partner? Who is the chief people officer?
Yeah. So how do you learn that then? So if you get a call from a new business you have not come across before, maybe it's a sector, what are you doing to assess them?
Well, that is where it's more difficult. Is it a completely brand new business? It is more difficult. I think you have to go on face-to-face meeting, going and meeting the managing partner or the chief people officer, finding out what's gone on. If it's a managing partner, we might not know them of old. If it's a chief people officer, we might know where they've come from. We might know their style. We might know their background. We might have dealt with them as a candidate. We probably have dealt with them as a candidate further down the line. So we know their natural style. If it is something completely fresh to us, then we have to work hard to try and get under the skin of it. And that takes a little bit of time. But it's, so we are dealing with a brand new client at the moment for a people director role. But again, maybe it's just a bit of time and experience, but 45 minutes to an hour with the CEO. I went in with an opinion and I came out with a completely different opinion. And it completely changed my view of a business from meeting the CEO for the good. Because this character was just fantastic.
And then are you in the car park then bringing up mental lists of who you've got who might be a good match for that?
Yeah, unfortunately, Jane, I'm not doing it in the car park. I'm doing it in my sleep. I'm doing it everywhere. There are, please don't take this the wrong way, but there are names and, and
even as we speak, things are,
even as we speak, names are,
action.
Yeah, it never stops, unfortunately.
It's a real art, isn't it? I think it's so interesting to sort of unpick what makes the recruitment process work in the way that you do it. And I think that's really interesting. So let's talk a little bit about HR people then. So I'd asked you about what makes a good HR person, and some of the stuff you've said already really is talking about this, but it's the idea that there's the right kind of HR person out there for everybody, for every role, for every business. But what would fly with one or be terrific with one could be an absolute train wreck with another. And it's this sort of matching of personality and style.
Yes.
That's the sort of the golden element.
But I think that is the art of it. That's the creative bit of it. There's also some of the science of it there, because when we look at a job spec or job description, a lot of the time, Jane, there's the same words, there's the same phrases, and you guys as candidates at whatever level can tick that box. Yes, I can. No, I can't. Yes, I have. No, I haven't. And so we get to that point, and then we get into the logistics. How much, where, particularly in this post-COVID world, what do you really mean by hybrid, flexible, remote, all that sort of stuff?
Yes.
And then you start getting into the words that I used in my answer to you: pragmatic, commercial, diplomatic. Actually, diplomacy. Sometimes, potentially for the law firms and some of the other stuff. That word, creative. All of those words are really, really important. And again, candidates will always tell me that they can do all of that. Our job is to work out a little bit who can and who and make that match between a client and a candidate. And I do think there's a good amount of art to it.
Yeah.
There's a sensible chunk of science to it. And there's just a few years and a few grey hairs of doing it, knowing what works and what doesn't work.
So thinking back to that Leeds 2005 market, you talked about Jet2, Norwich Union, Mamas and Papas, those kind of roles you were filling then, and the kind of HR roles, HR and L&D roles. What do you think has changed in terms of what HR and L&D people are expected to be delivering in the roles you're recruiting now? Do you think it is different?
Yes, I mean, I probably came in at the beginning, or not just, there was a move from HR manager to HR business partner.
Yeah.
At that point, Ulrich was all coming into it. It's then gone through, and there's different namings of jobs. It's people teams, it's people and culture teams. I think that some of the broad generalist piece wildly moved on. People need to be more commercial. There's more private equity backed businesses probably than there was 15 or so years ago. But I think HR tech has come on. I think interesting in this current climate, ED&I was there in those early 2005 times. It then went away and it's come back, and
as
it's
a specialism.
As a specialism, and with money, and with good money being spent on it. Probably the salaries in 2005 to the salaries now in that particular specialism has gone up quite a bit. But it has also so HR shared services has morphed into colleague experience, colleague engagement. There's a lot more around engagement. We actually broadened out just at the beginning of COVID into internal comms and engagement.
Yes.
Partly because that was all sitting under, or not all, but largely sitting under CPOs. And there was a move away from it just being on the side of an HR generalist desk into engagement and comms being a more specialist area.
Yeah.
Beyond that, the world of L&D has moved on a little bit. It's all called talent now, but there's a lot of the same stuff happening. And I think reward has gone has got right to the top of the agenda.
Yeah.
And is far, far more popular within a team and the size of the teams within the businesses than it probably was in 2005.
Yeah. Excellent. A good roundup. So let's talk about a little bit about your business, because you'd put a couple of interesting comments in about, I'd ask everybody on the show about what their power move was when it all came together. And you talked about firstly your move to running your own business, but also the changes that you made during COVID in terms of slimming the business down. Tell us a little bit about that and how that came about.
Well, COVID, and I sort of sometimes feel a little bit embarrassed in this, but COVID was actually really good for me personally.
Yeah.
I know it was very tough for a lot of people. Actually, business-wise, it was really awkward. 6 to 9 months of it being a bit grotty and there not being much in the way of recruitment going on. But actually, for me personally, I had been more old-fashioned, a bit of an old goat, Jane, to be honest, around presence in office. I was first in, last out. Why isn't everybody here? Where are they? All that sort of stuff. And suddenly, the world of Teams, Zoom, remote, flexible, and I hope my team, if you ask them now, would say that I'm a renewed individual where it's, pretty much come and go as you please. I mean, we don't really even have a policy. We have an office, a presence, a place to go, but people can come and go largely as they please. And it works. The business had to slim down because there was a lot less work. But actually, once we did that, and we made the decision to move out of the city centre and go rural, and that has largely played really, really well for us. And I have changed. I have definitely changed from being on the road first thing in the morning, sitting in the office till the bitter end. I make it work for me and my work-life balance. I have spent more time walking dogs and various other things and
on your Peloton.
On my Peloton, yeah. Well, that was a very much a lockdown thing. So, long and short of it, the setting up on my own was good. It was really good. It's been scary at times, but it has been really, really good. But that 2020 into 2021, whilst it was rough and tough for a lot of people, it changed me completely for the good, personally and professionally. And as I say, I think if you asked the gang that work with me now, they have a much better existence, that I'm not shouting and screaming where people are at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Modern world.
I've calmed down, Jane, which I think is a good thing.
So time for one last question then. So what's next for you then, Paul? So we've got this understanding of the evolution of the business. Internal comms is now one of your strands of recruitment. What's coming next for you?
Look, I think the next thing for me is to get... So we've got a really, really nice, neat, tight team of consultants that work with me. The next thing is to get all of them at their various levels up to the next level. My ultimate aim is that at a point, in however many years' time when I retire and pack it in, is that those guys are running it and taking it over. That is my ultimate aim in that. Whether it happens, whether we get to that, I don't know. But it is about taking, and it's a small business, Jane. It's 5 or 6 people. So it's about taking 2 or 3 different layers of people, newer recruiters, longer serving recruiters, more established recruiters, and taking them through and hopefully helping them, guiding them, developing them so that they can take it on. And I could possibly spend a little bit more time on the golf course.
Or Portugal. Maybe a Portuguese golf course.
Portuguese golf course. We might need to do a bit more work and place a few more people before I get onto Portuguese golf courses. But
you've got a few years yet before you get there. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Paul, and also for being so honest and open and showing us some of the workings there. Because I think it's really I love it when people say that they got things wrong, because I think too often, particularly HR people, we imagine we've got to be perfect all the time. And I think actually saying, do you know what, I got things wrong, but it wasn't the end of the world. You know, your business didn't crash and burn. You didn't lose that relationship. It will be okay. You know, these things happen.
Absolutely. And, you know, we got stuff wrong, and we will still get stuff wrong. But, you know, you do it in hopefully in a nice, pleasant way, and it doesn't cause too much heartache.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I hope everybody has got some useful takeaways there. I know I have. I've been scribbling away as we've chatted. So thank you, everybody, for listening. And do check out the other episodes. Thanks very much.